For some reason, nowadays, everyone likes to mock and make fun of the 90s era comic books, despite the fact that the best-selling comic book today would have been canceled in the 90s due to low sales. They were that much greater. Breaking records, all kinds of interesting new characters, new creators within the industry becoming superstars. We don't get anything like that anymore, but people love to trash and make fun of 90s comic books. I found this article from the Hollywood Reporter a few years ago from comic book historian Jason Sachs, and it's mostly just trashing the 90s comic industry. While there are certainly a lot of issues with 90s comic books, I'm not going to deny that. It's gotten a far worse reputation, in my opinion, than it deserves. But I guess the media, in order to upplay the terrible state that we're in now, they want to downplay the awesome stuff that was happening in the 90s that was actually successful and that people paid for.
There was not a lot of creative failures in the 90s. There was a handful, certainly. Did it sometimes go to excess? Yeah. I mean, you did a little bit.
The 90s are about excess. Everything with it.
Within everything. But did that harm comics? They're conflating the fact that there was a market crash with the creative content within the comics rather than a lot of the business related items that are actually to blame. It wasn't because Marvel killed Xavier in the past and did Age of Apocalypse, or that they killed, and that did Heroes Reborn, or that Batman had his back broken and was temporarily replaced, or that Superman got married, or that he died and came back like 6 months later. None of those things contributed to a lot of the failures and the flops. It did contribute a little bit to some of the artificially inflated highs with #1 issues and whatnot. But I guarantee that Marvel buying Heroes World and starting a distributor war, or the founding Image guys not releasing their books anywhere near the time that they were solicited to come out, sometimes waiting a full year for the next issue of a comic, had a lot more to do with the crashes that occurred in the 90s than giving Rob Liefeld Captain America and him having like beef tits.
In a lot of this article, it's like downplaying the enjoyment of the era, what author Jason Sachs calls the most interesting decade in comic book history, although he quickly explains that he means that in the sense of chaotic or volatile rather than enjoyable, acting like people weren't enjoying the comic books that they were reading. People like The Death of Superman. That is a fantastic comic book. People love the X-Men line. It was selling amazing. The 90s are an amazing decade for fucking Batman. There's a lot, and I do mean a lot, of enjoyable stuff going on there with the best renaissance of art that we've probably ever seen in comic books.
You look at Batman, they did the breaking of the bat after Nightfall. Then you did Night's End, where Batman, Bruce has to come back and take his mantle back from Azrael. Then a little later, you had like Contagion and what was it? No Man's Land, Cataclysm. Where like it fundamentally reshaped Gotham in a way that nobody complains about. Everything about it is great, and they're still exploring it almost 30 years later. I think that Superman was probably the biggest growth to the Superman family. The death of Superman led to the biggest growth in the Superman family of all times, with the addition of Connor Kent and the Eradicator, having Cyborg, Superman, and Steel. You ended up with 4 new fucking super people as a result of it.
If you go to the X-Men, the X-Men line was awesome.
Yeah.
It became this enormous franchise, the best-selling franchise in comic books, and they still look at those X events going on in the 90s. They weren't big Marvel crossovers. They just happened in X-Men comic books, and they were all basically can't miss.
Yeah, they were not only, they literally started referring to it as the X-over instead of crossover because of how popular and how well they sold. Nobody dropped off when there was an X-over event. That meant you picked up New Mutants or X-Force for the first time. You bought 2 issues of Excalibur that you never would have otherwise, and maybe you stuck around after it. because it actually drew people in to continue reading. It didn't just force them to read it for the next chapter. It also possibly opened the door for that to them to become a new reader to a new title and add another book to their pull list. Did they have gimmicks? Sure. Did they sometimes do a die cut cover or foil or a hologram or whatever? Absolutely. Did those get kind of artificially inflated in their values? Absolutely. Because people were high on fucking gimmick fever. But at the same time, those books are still can't miss reads today.
He then goes into creator empowerment dismissed as hubris, stating the poor business decisions alone tell a fascinating story. In that way, I think the 90s books can be read as a business book or even as a bit of a tragedy as young creators flew a bit too close to the sun and then saw their own egos cause them to flutter back to earth. Obviously talking about the Image 7. Was Image and their rollout and their enormous popularity in the beginning, was it always successful? Absolutely not. But to this day, Image Comics exists. There's another opportunity. There are more gateways into comic books now because that happened. And almost all those creators that did the Image 7 stuff are all successful to this day businessmen-wise because they didn't know what they were doing and it was all brand new stuff. But now we are getting all the rewards because of that.
They were forced to learn how to run before they learned how to crawl. Once they jumped over and started their own thing. And the thing is, they hadn't made like major bank at Marvel or DC. It was a major risk for them going the way that they did, because for that first year or two at Image, when they started, every single one of those 7 guys was straight up blacklisted from the big 2. If Image fails in that first year or so, these guys are all working on fucking Madison Avenue at best. Maybe they're storyboarding a video game somewhere back in the 90s. They are not working in comics again.
They left Spider-Man. They left the X-Men. They left the biggest books in all the comic books, and they decided that creator-owned rights were something worth fighting for. And I think in the end, while it didn't go smoothly, and yes, they had some hubris in there, and not everything worked out the way it should have, in the end, they pioneered something and they guaranteed something that really is fundamental to the industry today. Without these guys, you might not have a Mark Miller kick-ass, success where he ends up at Netflix because he was able to secure and own his own creator rights on those types of projects. Without these dudes taking that risk and taking the plunge, that type of stuff just isn't around.
The closest thing that existed in comics up until that point was maybe Vertigo, and they didn't do superhero stuff.
And they were quickly taking away the creator rights and saying we owned all that stuff.
Yes.
And now everything that would have been at Vertigo has been at Image Comics for like the last 30 years.
Yeah, it's the reason why the Vertigo imprint is worthless now. If there's no Image, then when Mark Miller becomes the big deal that he did at Marvel in the early 2000s, they don't start the Icon imprint between him and Brian Bendis. Brian Bendis is overdoing Powers at Image. They want to bring that in-house. They created a creator-owned line at Marvel in the 2000s because it was necessary. Does that mean that they didn't fuck up? Hell no. You know what? If they had somebody
that in that position would have fucked up.
So really what it comes down to is just not having their ducks in a row. Okay, they're brand new. They're a startup. Every startup fucks up.
Yeah, there's a bunch of 20-year-old artists pretending to be business people, but it worked out in the end. Another interesting thing that Jason Sachs does here is he starts blaming fans and speculators for the crash. That runaway sales success sparked the gold rush of people looking to pay their kids' college funds with profits from holographic issues like Fantastic Four, The Death of Superman, Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, and Youngblood that helped spark the bust in sales that crushed the industry for the rest of the decade. And me personally, I don't think that's the fans' fault. They were buying what was presented to them. That was the publisher's fault for flooding the market with bullshit that they knew in the end wasn't going to be profitable. But it was also so many new retailers coming in that didn't really know comic books. So you had a lot of people that were not well-versed in comic book industry or business whatsoever jumping in on it. And not surprisingly, a lot of them failed in the end. So I I blame the publishers and the rash of new stores that didn't know what they were doing, and not the fans.
Yeah, I mean, look, the publishers were the ones trying to get in and get their shit on fucking QVC with their whole launch. I remember being like 14, 15 years old. QVC would have an entire night of collectibles, and a third of the fucking show was dedicated to manufactured collectible comics, where you could get the entire release line from Image or from Marvel or whatever, of all their new heroes. Marvel and DC, in response to Image coming out, they released so many brand new characters with new number ones, slapped the big number one issue collector's item, blah, 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 to try to get everybody to buy it up as if it was a collectible. They took advantage of a lot of the newer kids, because that was the last big boom of kids to come into comics because of the popularity of a lot of the cartoons. When you say retailers, you have the new retailers, and then you have a lot of the card retailers, because that was where I remember it was all the baseball card shops that started carrying comics, and they were treating it like baseball cards, not like comics. And they figured rarity is the only thing that really matters, because that's really what it came down to for a lot of baseball cards. It was rare. It was a rarity issue. So the rarer something is, the more I want it.
But we know that manufactured scarcity almost never works. It blows up these collectible type of industries. It broke baseball cards and in all kind of collectibles for a long time. And it kind of broke comic books there for a minute. And now we're doing the exact same thing, as if we learned nothing from the 90s. But that was a publisher thing. Manufacturing scarcity.
And I know that a lot of times, I remember hearing this not that long ago, people comparing the current comic industry to, oh, well, variants were the problem in the 90s too. They weren't. You had like 5 covers for X-Men #1. You had like 3 covers for Spider-Man #1. You had 1 cover and a bunch of different cards for X-Force #1. Yeah, they sell you on gimmicks. They
polybag Death of Superman.
Yeah. And the 2 different colored bags, the white color and the black color bag, and the
polybag with the Prince trading card.
Yeah, the second Prince and the gold cover versus the silver cover versus the regular cover. They did, yeah, and the chromium covers. But that was the only fucking cover that month. Like Bloodstrike #2. Yeah, it was a gimmick cover, but it wasn't a variant. There was only the fucking chromium cover. You got chromium or you didn't buy the comic. It was that simple. That's not a variant. That's a gimmick. A variant has to have multiple choices involved. That was the exact same time that you also had creators, especially Image, that was really driving hype, missing their fucking deadlines because there wasn't a final order cutoff back then. Once you placed your order, you were locked in. You couldn't change it. So if the book doesn't come out for a fucking year and there's zero interest by the time it hits the shelf, guess what? You bought heavy on Youngblood #6 when it was solicited a year ago. When it finally hits the shelf and only 10% of the people that would have bought it back then are buying it now, you're stuck with 90% unsellable product. That's on the publishers. And that's on the system. That has nothing to do even with the retailer or the speculator.
I think the worst point that Jason Sachs makes in here is when he starts painting the 90s as mostly trash, with very few exceptions, stating that everything from the decade is cheesy, badly illustrated, or created as a cash-in in some way. The quarter bins are filled with overflowing copies of Brigade, X-O Man-O-War, and the Saga Spider-Man, and a lot of that material is pretty dire. But this idea that most 90s comic books are absolute trash because they were cheesy and over the top and fun. Go watch fucking Total Recall. It's still badass. Go watch Predator. Everything was over the top and fun. And the comic books certainly were fulfilling those ideas and stuff. But a lot of that shit is really good. It was just overprinted is the reason it's in the dollar bins, not because it was bad.
I call bullshit on his entire argument. Do you know what? I spend a lot of time looking in fucking dollar bins. Do you know what's never in there? Spider-Man. Doesn't matter what fucking era it is. Do you know what is in there? Moon Knight. the different ghosts, some iterations of Ghost Rider, almost all of the Marvel Now stuff, and the all different stuff. Sleepwalker, some, but not even that much. Robin. It's, what's in there? C and D list and C and D tier titles.
There's lots of Valiant stuff in the 90s though, because there was a lot of money flowing in, and they did overprint it.
Yes, they absolutely
a lot of fucking Youngblood.
Yeah, it overprinted, but honestly, there's not even that much Youngblood. It wasn't. I look all the time for cool early 90s stuff that I've just, I've parted with over the years, and I'm like, I kind of want it back in my collection. You know what? I don't see much of it. I really don't, because I think that there was an audience for it then, there's an audience for it now, and people have bought it up over the years. It churns a lot more than a lot of other shit that comes out, especially a lot of modern shit. That has zero churn to it and never turns over, unfortunately. So no, do I think that it was badly illustrated? Hell no. You have some of the best illustrators on the planet. Did you have some people drawing outside of their comfort zone? And did you have some things that were done to wild excess that probably shouldn't have been? Oh yeah. Was Herb Trimp supposed to be trying to draw like Rob Liefeld in 1994? No, he should have been drawn like Herb Trimp. But he wasn't getting work because the publishers were fucking retards and they were playing follow the leader too. So you had some stuff that was poorly illustrated where there was creators trying to just copy the popular style of the day that they shouldn't have been. Is it poorly written? Hell no. You have some very classic stories. There's a lot of classic Batman. There's a lot of classic X-Men. There's a lot of classic Spider-Man. Say what you will about the fucking Clone Saga and it going too long and being too convoluted. That's editorial. That's not creative. All the rest of the ASM from that era, pretty goddamn good. You know why? Because it was the only book that didn't get that, and maybe Hulk were the only two books that did not get rebooted for Heroes Reborn.
Hulk was pretty fucking good at the time, though. 90s Hulk was fun.
Yeah. You had Dale Keown Hulk. You had, then followed up by Gary Frank Hulk. Then you had, I think Mike Deodato Hulk back before he just traced 3D models.
And even before that, you had McFarlane Hulk, I think.
You had McFarlane Hulk way before that.
Yeah, this is awesome.
And you had Mike Deodato. Okay, yeah, so you went from McFarlane to Keown to Gary Frank to Mike Deodato Jr. On Hulk. That is a pretty. Oh, and I think Angel Medina was thrown in there too. That's not like X-Men, Uncanny X-Men from like 1975 to 1995 or like 2000, Murderer's Row of artists, but it's not that far off either.
Were there problems in the 90s? Mostly it was business problems. The comic books themselves brought in a ton of fans, something that they can't do today. Sales today that are lauded as amazing would get comic books canceled in the 90s. We're not even living in the same universe, and to go out there and try and disparage something that was so successful and introduced so many awesome things, whether it be characters, concepts, or even the creators of the time, is just bullshit in hindsight. Being 240/20, I guess at this point, you can't even fucking see clearly that the business was in such better position at that point than it is today.
Even post crash, when sales expectations were a lot lower, everything there. So you're talking 98, 97, 99. That is the post crash era. Even those sales put the cancellation numbers then were higher than the good sales numbers now. I remember in 2003, Wildstorm. So this is after they've been bought by DC. They are not the 1993 Jim Lee Wildcats Wildstorm. They had much lower expectations on them. Do you know what cancellation level was? 25,000 units. That was cancellation. Do you know how many Marvel and DC titles today can't do 25,000 units monthly? Probably about maybe a third to half of their line.
Do appreciate the perspective, talking about the 90s, and people like to dog on it, but it's much better than that. If you'd like the full conversation of this, but also about DC's weird inferiority complex when it comes to Marvel Comics, it is live right now on Think Critical Patreon. The Dok Unfiltered podcast, there's a link in the video description. Hope to see you there very soon. We've also got the Q&A, the Hot or Not podcast, the Geek Picks, lots of great stuff going on Think Critical Patreon.